call to order the instruction work group of the Madison Metropolitan School District Board of Education for September 11th, 2017. And the first order of business tonight is public appearances, and it looks like we've got a handful with Mike Teitelbaum first and Susan Gettert second. It's 3 minutes, and let me get this set, and then I will tell you when I'm ready, and you can tell me when you're ready. Anytime. The green light should be on, yes.
So I'm Mike Teitelbaum. I'm a parent in the district. I have the great fortune of being able to send my children to Shorewood Elementary, which has a wonderful principal who's very committed to advanced learning, has a wonderful ALS, we're now calling the Roundtree, who's great at her job, works very hard at it. Unfortunately, despite all that, this past year my wife and I decided to take our oldest daughter out of Shorewood Elementary and send her to a private school. That is not a decision I was looking for an excuse to make. That is a decision that makes me very sad. I love Shorewood Elementary. It's a great school. My second daughter is there. In a couple of years, my third daughter will be there. I'm heavily involved in the school. I see the building every day. And I've also been, but my daughter, my oldest daughter, was identified as an advanced learner in literacy. And I have been involved in advocating for advanced learning in the district for a number of years now. Not as long as some of the other people in this room. But I've been around at least long enough that the plan we are now looking to replace, I was involved in helping write. And having done that for a number of years, it just became very apparent to me that at the present time, this district and its schools has no idea what to do with students who are advanced in literacy. There are things to do for students who have been identified as advanced learners in mathematics. We cluster them in some schools. We allow them to accelerate grades in some schools. I am very glad that those policies are being enshrined in the plan that you all have before you. That's working well in some places, it's not working well in others, and we all know there are huge equity gaps in how these programs have been in place. But in literacy, while we have the ability to identify students, we have no idea who students are. There is not really programming in place. And that's not to mention the other domains where we don't really systematically identify them as we do. So we made this decision to take my daughter out of school and send her to a private school, which is expensive, and luckily I have the resources that I can do that. Obviously not everybody does. And I guess what I want to say about that is there's a lot of great emphasis in the plan that you are all looking at on identification. And identification is absolutely crucial. It needs to be, as all of you know, extended to a much broader variety of students. It needs to be done in a much more equitable fashion. I'm a big fan of that, but my daughter was identified, and identifying advanced learners is a first step, and it is literally only a first step. And we need to know, once students are identified, what programming for them is specifically going to look like in the classroom, who will be in charge of that programming, who will train the people who are in charge of that programming, who will be committed to making sure that training and that programming happens, and then how we will measure if it is being done effectively. And so as you consider this plan, I'd like to keep you in mind.
Thank you. Susan, followed by Sherry Gallitzer.
About the district's lack of communication with
Cherry, followed by Chris Gomez-Schmidt.
I'm Cherry Gallitzer. I'm a mother of three, two currently in school, and one just recently graduated. And I wrote you guys, I know that I'll just read it. So first, sincerely thank you for all the work that you do in teenage improving and empowering and providing education systems. And I appreciate your work. A lot of work and effort to go and make your school
Chris?
Years. But I'm very happy to see the training come back to the board for consideration, especially on the storytelling topic. I'm privileged of working with patients. This is a wrestle here, and I'm encouraged throughout my vision and this experience that I hope that will lend the headlines to this work and be helpful in moving them forward. I just want to touch on a couple of points that someone emailed earlier. A couple of things that are really important to this work is what are we trying to accomplish? Really trying to figure out where
Thanks to all the speakers. The next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes. And I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes dated May 1st and June 5th of 2017. Laura, your advisory vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes 7-0. And as our speakers previewed, the main item on the agenda tonight is the Advanced Learner Plan revisions. And this is currently scheduled for final approval at the September 25th, 2017 board meeting. And Jen, would you like to introduce Ethan? And I don't know if Caroline is also, I don't know who's joining Ethan.
We have Ethan Netterstrom, Lisa Quistad, and Caroline Racing Gillis. Come on up, you guys. And Lisa's actually going to introduce the item.
Okay, thanks Barb, appreciate it. So I'm gonna just get started and do a little framing before Ethan and Caroline share some of the detail around the Advanced Learning Plan. First of all, it's nice to see everyone again. Welcome to the instructional work group, and you've gotten 2 draft copies of the Advanced Learning Plan so far, and we're here tonight because we intend to take further feedback before we hope to get final approval at the end of the month. So this is another piece of the feedback process, and I just want to be sure folks know that we do take that very seriously moving forward. So I want to say thank you to Ethan, our Director of Advanced Learning, and also Caroline Racine Gillis, our Executive Director of Integrated Supports and Accelerated Learning, and the folks that have provided lots of feedback, many of whom are in the room, to the plan as it is right now. We think that this plan represents a more collaborative approach to writing a plan. In my experience of writing all 3 of these, this has been the most integrated work that I've done, and it feels much less siloed and much less fragmented than the work that we did in the past. The plan actually represents, more of an emphasis on culturally and linguistically responsive practices, and a more active role in working with culturally diverse families to recognize potential. So a couple of reminders. I'm going to take us back a little bit in the development of this because you all have seen me here before talking about advanced learning. So we had our first year of external evaluations in our 3-year approved plan. And we learned from that evaluation, and we learned some lessons moving forward for future external evaluations. We came to you in February. I was here with Lori Felenz, and we discussed the results of the external evaluation. And then when Ethan was hired in May, we were back here and we talked about some next steps. So yes, it is true. He has not been here much longer than 6 months. So a reminder also that you all authorized with us in the budget process the additional FTE to put a 0.5 foundational staff member in all of our schools to support case management and support for teachers. So we want to thank you for that moving forward into the year. I also want to say we purposely spent some time reorganizing our teaching and learning organization to ensure that advanced learning was more directly supported, more prominently represented in the organization, and more integrated amongst the work in teaching and learning. Hence, Caroline is here to share in the discussion tonight as well. So I want to start off by saying that we came out in the plan with what we felt was a pretty strong equity vision around the work for advanced learning. And this was our actually really intentional statement around targeted universalism. While we are focusing on underrepresented students, and you saw that a lot in the plan, particularly students of color, that doesn't mean that we are not focusing on other groups. We believe that our language needed to be strong and focus on what was essential for some students, but that is also good and is also a focus for all students. It's important that we identify and support students who are already high achievers, and it's also important that we guard against bias. and we really take a look closely at our identification process and support. So it's a both and. What we believe is essential for some is really good and has to be excellent for all. I want to thank Chris. She sent us some articles this morning, which I printed off and read, and really interesting information in there about program models for low-income, high-ability students with a focus on multiple criteria for identification, the words high-powered, culturally and linguistically responsive curriculum, and then also boldly recognizing stereotype threats and eliminating obstacles for participation. So if you read through the plan, you probably saw that thread there, and it was encouraging to see that in the research and literature that Chris sent out as well, so thank you. And I also want to foreshadow and say this really isn't just about identifying more. It isn't just about more numbers. It's really about a robust system of identification and support and more targeted communication with families and students to let them know the opportunities that are available for them. Ethan and Caroline are going to dig into some of those details, and I will hand it off to them. I will respectfully ask that we have Ethan get through the slides. He is really good at concise language moving forward. I am more verbose. He is much better about being concise, and I want to have him take this opportunity, but we'll have lots of opportunity for feedback at the end.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So before jumping into this, very much want to say, again, coming from being a principal the last 8 years and coming into this role, I'm very much always focused on implementation. So drafting and revising and feedback has been amazing, but I'm ready to implement. So hopefully we take the feedback from tonight from parents and when we outreach more to teachers and the board and are able to do that and do that successfully and well. So again, focusing on the equity around advanced learning, not just how are we identifying students, but also how are we serving students and how can we build on what we've already done and serve students better as well. So a lot of what you'll see in this plan is we took a very inclusive approach to advanced learning in that school model where we're meeting the needs of all of our different groups of kids within the community schools and keeping our communities intact. And I also think of this very much as a living document, so that's why the different advisory groups and the teacher group and the community group are very critical, because things will adjust and flow as we implement, but very much a living document. So taking a look at our current demographics of students who are identified with advanced learning needs, you'll see the ratio there. We're more than half are currently white, and there's smaller slices with each of the each of our underrepresented groups and our subgroups. And you'll see EL and low income and IEP on this side too. So this is just kind of where we're at currently, and really one of my call to action on how do we better service all kids, not just kids who we are currently. So, but again, as one of our parents mentioned, not serving kids who've been identified, but how do we build on what we're doing? So, and again, in talking in what's new in the plan, building on things that we've already done or started to do, and again, the thing of universal and targeted, making sure we're meeting the needs of all kids and targeting in and doing extra services and outreach and pieces for our targeted groups. An inclusive and collaborative way of working, so we're not working siloed, we're working with content teams and teacher teams and schools and teachers and not working in a silo. And again, the different groups that we'll reach out to. So some of the things that, as Lisa had mentioned in the past, we had the external evaluation that gave us some feedback on how to start working with differentiation and how to set really the areas that you'll see in the presentation, help set that up. Other things that we've done prior to now, the ALIRT, the Advanced Learning Specialist allocation, going up to a half-time foundational in all the schools has been huge for the staff, so that way they can focus in on 2 schools instead of 3, and in the past years it had been 5 and 6 even in the past. So really giving us a foundational level to help make sure that the plan is well implemented at the school level. Other things that happened prior to now, the data cleanup in OASIS, where the identification was really looked at, and so the data is more user-friendly and accessible. And then the work we've done collaborating with math around iReady and curriculum compacting, how the math department's done that and our role in helping with that too. So that, again, not being an advanced learning strategy, but a math content strategy, and how AL feeds into that, and hoping to do that with the other departments and work very much in tandem with them too. So some of the things that you'll see that are new in the plan that build off those things, the organizational changes, again, the advanced learning department now being integrative supports and accelerated learning, so working as a part of the MTSS framework, so that we can identify kids at different tiers and really try to meet their needs, working with the teaching and learning content area department. So putting that with other like structures has been helpful. The referral and identification process, which we'll get into a little, and really the, again, universal and targeted, of really trying to dig in deep and make sure we're finding kids who otherwise might have got glossed over. Targeted communication practices, so making sure that we're outreaching to families more than we have. So one of the things that came up in the RMC report is some families didn't even know their students were identified. So how can we fix that? So making sure not just through the identification process that we're really reaching out to families, but through the service process and getting their input on how to best serve kids. So really making a concentrated effort on that. The role of the advanced learning specialist, also looking at historically what they've done as compared to implementing the plan. So again, things like what type of coaching or teacher team support or professional learning experiences that we can provide to them and them to the schools, and working and together with them. And then a big piece, definitely for me, again, coming from a principal lens, is the accountability and monitoring. And I think I said this last time, if we just make a plan and we just talk about it and don't do anything, we've wasted a great deal of time and a lot of opportunities for children, and that's the last thing that I want to do. So making sure that we're really tracking with the advanced learning school level implementation plan, what kind of practices are happening at school, what does a okay practice look like, what is good, what is great, and how do we scale up across the district things that are working very well. So those are some of the things you'll see in the next couple of slides. So the way the presentation is broken down is really looking at the 5 different areas that came up, and then objectives and activities to help implement and reach those objectives. And again, so that's how it'll be set up the next couple. So some questions that I'm hoping that you can think about when we go through this. And again, I'm open to any and all feedback, but this will help target as well. What are some of the strengths that you do see in the plan? Does it address areas of opportunity? Is it making sure that we're not missing things? And things that you just don't see, like one of the things we're building still are the metrics for the AL school level implementation plan, and other things that you're thinking that need to be in there that or revised in there. Oh, I should have used a bigger font. That's what I'm learning. Feedback from myself. So making sure our ID process is just clear and equitable. So making sure that we're using our national and local norms, and this will get explained in a couple of slides as well, but really digging in around representation and making sure all of our kids are getting opportunities and making sure we're seeing potential, and not just kids who are scoring exceptionally well, but making sure we're, again, getting kids that we would have missed otherwise, so we can provide them services and help all kids grow. And then again, transitions is another piece. The gaps between elementary and middle and high. Some things like helping with advanced class placement and seeing that kids are put in the correct classes, or seeing what are some things as far as individual service plans for students, so that way when a kid is coming into middle school, we're not starting over, or we're not forgetting where they are, but we're figuring out what the seamless integration from 5 to 6 is. So really working on those things as well. And then that'll be working with the counseling department and content team. So a lot of the things you'll see in the plan coming up again is it's going to take a lot of collaboration with different departments and schools. Is definitely moving away from a siloed approach, because that's we want to be successful with this and meeting the needs of kids. So again, then some of the activities to do that, again, the identification piece, and then really targeted outreach. So things like when a student shows up on the consideration roster for potential advanced learning needs. So not just the ALS, the Advanced Learning Specialist, starting an inquiry process, but sending out a letter to families or email or a call or some combination of those three things and saying, your child may have some needs, advanced learning needs in whatever domain or area it is, and also send them a form, like here's an inquiry form. What would we want to share that you're finding great about your child, so that we can start looking at that right away. So right away we're capturing extra data, and that we're really doing outreach, because that's going to be critical. Otherwise, I don't want it to be just kids who can self-advocate or parent advocate. We want to make sure that we're helping people become advocates. We're helping identify their children to do so. Professional learning, again, this goes back to the culturally linguistic responsive practices, and really making a concerted effort to fight bias and to fight just making sure kids get services, because I don't want bias or other prejudices to stop our kids from getting services. And right now, looking at how our population is broken down, I feel like there's a lot of kids who could benefit from services who just haven't had the opportunity, and it's our job to provide them that opportunity. And then coordinating with the middle school and high school counselors, counseling department, and again looking at if ultimately we're hoping to better prepare kids for honors and AP classes, how are we doing that back map throughout the grades to really provide rigorous instruction and supports and enrichment opportunities. So some of the updates to identification, which are hinted at in the last couple of slides. First, looking at MAP and COGAT percentile scores. Currently they're set at 95th. And there's some use of local and group norms. So looking at this would feed into the consideration roster, which means the students that pop up on our data system for a advanced learning specialist to start the process. So there's a couple different ways you can start the process. One is through the universal screening, which is that. Another is through referrals from teachers or students or families. So there's a couple of ways. And so looking at the local and group norms and looking to do a cut of the top 20% of students across each grade level in Madison, so looking at not national norms but Madison. So that way this gives us a better place to start, so we're hopefully catching more kids. And again, this doesn't mean that if a child pops up on here, they're not automatically identified. It means this is a student we need to take a look at, and so let's start taking a look and to see what needs that they have. And then TOPS, teacher observation or potential in students. It's like a observational screening form. So it's looking for different behaviors in the classroom, and this is more leadership, creativity, and some arts as well. And so using it more strategically instead of supplementally. So looking at grades 1, 4, and 6. So we get at least once in each cycle. And really having the advanced learning specialist be trained on using TOPS and start to, and then support teachers to and provide PD for those that want or need to. And when you look at the actual TOPS tool, it doesn't just look for like gifted, like stereotypical gifted behaviors. It looks for all kinds of behaviors. So it might be a student who for leadership, it might be off-task behaviors that you're looking at, or other things that are not necessarily teacher-pleasing behaviors. So we're really digging in with an equity type lens of seeing all the different things that can be happening in a classroom. Because a kid could be off-task because they're bored or already know the content, or they have some leadership that they want to put forward. So it looks at those things as well. So again, on the left is the current pie chart that we just talked about, our kids who are currently identified. The right is kids who could potentially be identified just by map changes. So again, looking at the last slide, the percentile changes to map. So this again would be what the consideration roster would look like and give us our starting point of where to start identification as a universal screening. So there's some overlap between the two, but this is would be a starting point, and particularly if you look at the bottom, the EL status and low income, that's very hopeful for me. So it has the potential to do a lot of help. And again, this isn't even taking into consideration what TOPS could do for us too in the other pieces. So our second area, MTSS, multi-tier systems of support. So a lot of this is really around collaboration with the other departments, especially content area teams, and making sure that advanced learning isn't like a tacked on thing afterwards, but how do we get at the front of the conversation? So when teacher teams are planning for math or literacy or science or what have you, and they're looking at how do we meet what's our core instruction look like, and how do we meet kids' needs, and then how do we bring kids up to core, but how about also kids who are at core, how do we accelerate them and meet their needs too? So getting in front of those pieces, and again, some of that is through differentiation and teacher support, and some of it is through the work of the advanced learning specialist too, whether through supporting teachers or in some cases directly as well. So making sure that what we're doing is aligned and it works well with what's already in place. So one of the things that we'll be developing on the right, the formal guidance for differentiation, grouping, interventions, curriculum replacement, all those pieces, that's really the how. So once we've identified kids, how are we meeting their needs? Those are the things that we need to develop throughout the year. So part of it will be doing an assessment of what's currently in place at schools, what's working well at schools, what are some things that can be replicated, and how do we, again, really bring the AL conversation into the larger MTSS and content area pieces. And it might also include looking out of the district at other things that are working well that would fit as far as strategies and instruction. Third area, communication and collaboration, and again, just very explicit outreach to families, especially underrepresented families. So we'll have a couple of things to do it. There's the enhanced website, the communication timeline, which really shows how different families and schools and staff can expect to have communication from the AL department or AL specialists throughout the year and what that looks like, and it puts really concrete timelines on it. Advanced learning advisory committees, so we'll do those at the high schools instead of at Doyle, so that way they're more accessible for folks. We'll do 2 at East High School, 2 at West throughout the year, so we'll actually do 4. And so that'll be a way to share out what the department's doing, about the plan, get feedback, do presentations on topics of interest for parents, and again, gather more feedback and share the data. So that'll be an important piece. We're also going to do a teacher advisor group, because while I think Chris mentioned during the summer it was difficult to get teachers, and then very few responded to the survey. We know that without teachers this isn't going to succeed at all, and we don't want to make an ask of teachers, so it's how do we take what they're already doing and help through the content areas to meet the needs of our students with advanced learning needs, and really how are some of the practices for students with AL needs, how can we use those to help all kids, not just kids with advanced learning needs, because that's the critical piece. So we'll put together just a teacher advisor group in addition to the larger committee, and that's going to be very important going forward too. Yeah. So the advanced learning specialists, so these are some of the roles that they have, and they have many more too, but really working with them, and we've been going through calendaring and figuring out what do they spend most of their time on. Does it change throughout the year? Sometimes it's identification, sometimes it's teacher team support, and all the different pieces that go with it, especially the coaching, guidance, and so what, like little things that we found can be levers, like moving it professional development for the specialists to Fridays instead of Monday afternoons. So Monday afternoons they can be at the schools, they can support the teacher team meetings or lead PD or provide PD or be a sounding board for staff too. So just more integrated into the buildings too, and I think moving up to the 0.5 has really helped with that too. Professional learning, so again, not just providing the advanced learning specialist professional development, but helping them learn how to coach and support better and provide services better, and working with the principals and school teams to really figure out what's going on again at the schools and what can we leverage and how can we help. So one of the things we'll do next summer too is part of the annual Teaching and Learning Institute. Part of it will be dedicated to advanced learning and how do we work that into the content areas again in support. So making sure that we're developing things really well this year so we can develop and implement both. Monitoring and accountability. So this comes with a couple of levels. One is watching and helping what the advanced learning staff actually do and their responsibilities to make sure the AL plan is implemented. Revisiting the AL staffing model. Again, we have the foundational level that's going to help with the implementation. The 3-year review external cycle again, and then the annual reporting back, which will be demographic metrics, identification, implementation metrics, and then the narrative pieces to go with that, and figuring out again what does okay look like, what does good look like, what does great look like, and how do we get okay up to great. So those pieces. And then again the coaching supports and the school level implementation plan being, I think, one of our main levers to to make sure advanced learning is happening and happening well. So that plan is basically was built out of the RMC evaluation, saying there was a need for increased metrics and systems. Right now, it's got 24, 25 indicators across 6 or 7 different areas that kind of mirror the pieces of the plan and the presentation that you've seen. So it goes anywhere from the role of the ALS, how PD is provided to schools, how kids are identified, what services exist for each domain, advice on clustering, and all the different pieces. And so it's a document that the ALS will initially start to populate and then meet with principals to review, and then have the school leadership teams go through and figure out what it currently looks like in the status. And again, that's a living document too, knowing it'll ebb and flow throughout the year and figure out what else needs to be added or taken off too. But it gives us a really good idea of how schools are implementing, and so that way we can take a look at them and figure out if certain schools need support, whether it's from myself or for other staff, or if they have issues they want to think through or we think that they could benefit from thinking through. So a way to figure out who needs support rather than waiting until the end of the year. It gives us earlier indicators. And then making sure that there's at least a quarterly explicit review with the school level teams around it. So it's not left just to the AL staff in the buildings to, to sink or swim with. It's got to be a whole school approach. So some potential budget implications, and we'll build these out more in the next week and a half too, but at this point was thinking professional development around the TOPS tool for the advanced learning specialists, and making sure that they had a really good idea of how it functions and using it correctly throughout the schools. And then resources to better address the AL domains. And again, this goes back to working with the content teams and really embedding that in and figuring out what that'll look like throughout the year in terms of PD and curriculum pieces. So those were the two needs right now. So some of the next steps, taking feedback, again, from the board, parents. The plan's been put into the next couple of newsletters, and it was already in one, but for the parents and in the teachers to see what feedback we get through that, and also figuring out how we can do more outreach in the next week and a half. Again, submitting at the end of the month, and then the first time for principal professional development on it would be not till after it's approved, and that'd mainly focus on the school level implementation plan. So that was me talking way too fast about advanced learning, and that's where I'm at this point.
Okay, thank you. Nikki gets us started.
I don't mean to sound like a broken record. I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but I'm going to raise an issue that I normally tend to raise. In this particular situation, why is dual exceptional mentioned exactly one time on page 8 of the entire plan? We have at most 10% individuals with IEPs. And right in some that's the goal, is to get 10%. Right now we're at 5%. Just curious on why that's not overly developed, because it is an underrepresented area.
Yeah, I hadn't had that feedback before, so I appreciate it, and we'll make sure we address it more explicitly and work with specialized service department to make sure that we do, and do the same type of outreach we will for other populations. So I appreciate that.
Appreciate it.
I'll start hitting some of my questions, and I'm not going to hit them all now because I hope to come back. Just a few kind of just informational questions to begin with. A couple references to the TOPS evaluation, TOPS scale. 2 questions related to that. Number one is, will we use local norms with that also, or will that just be a straight?
So that's a observational tool, so it's not like COGAT or MAP where they get a score. It's more like what kind of behaviors are you seeing and tracking them over time, and then if you see like a behavior coming up multiple times, doing a deeper rating scale of students.
So it's not like the HOPE scale where there's actually numeric and recommended the.
No.
That's actually a related question, which is why isn't the HOPE scale included? But the other thing is that TOPS is related to the U-STARS program, and I'm wondering if we're doing anything with the broader U-STARS curriculum programming.
Yeah, so at the moment it was to provide more PD to the AL staff, and TOPS works best when you are doing really rigorous, engaging, culturally relevant curriculum. But the hope is that that's what Madison curriculum should look like. So if the Madison core curriculum is engaging and relevant and relationship-based and pushing children, we should be able to use TOPS with it as well. That was the thinking at this point.
Okay, so we're not going to expand use of U-Stars
not at this
or that. I have science friends who like U-Stars a lot,
Yeah.
so it's
Yeah.
just a thing. Again, some of these are just question on identification, which is when we get into two examples, and they may have different answers. One of them is the accelerated middle school math, students who are taking algebra in 7th grade, geometry in 8th, and or just algebra in 8th. Are those students automatic? Is it a chicken and egg thing with that? Is it, how does that work?
Yeah. So the math compacted sequence is not advanced learning. So
Okay.
it's just kids are accessing core quicker. Some of the kids in that sequence do have advanced learning needs, and it will be met by them, and some have other advanced learning needs that are not met by that. But that's the idea of core compacted curriculum, and at some point we'd love to work with the literacy department and others to do the same, and I think that'll help really differentiate and also help by putting kids in different sequences to really meet their needs in that way. So it's not necessarily a AL need as well.
Okay, so there's some overlap, but they're not.
Yes.
It's not considered. I guess similar things with the leadership activities you list here. That there's overlap, but they're not necessarily. It's not a. If you sign up for X, you are automatically on the advanced learning roster, or. Okay, I'm trying to figure out how this stuff works.
So we were thinking, like, let's say there's a student council. It doesn't mean the child has leadership advanced learning needs, but it would also be a good idea, like, if kids signed up for that, maybe that's a list of kids to start assessing and start paying extra attention to.
So maybe that leads to a little bit. Maybe you can go a little deeper into the notion of the consideration roster, and a couple places to walk through the flow chart a little bit, but also if a student goes through the consideration process in year 1, and do they remain on a roster for consideration in year 2? Is it a start over process? I mean, I guess that kind of question too. And we used to have an AL monitor. Lisa's smiling because that was a mess. But we used to have that, and I guess that, both in terms of keeping statistics and metrics, and also in terms of the internal tracking of students. How does the consideration roster work?
Right. So the consideration roster right now comes up in data dashboard based off of MAP and COGAT, and it's basically just a way where the data team has made the system so that kids in the certain percentiles show up, and then there's all their information across. So it's just pulling that information, and then the advanced learning specialist can start with that, looking where the kids are. So that's something that's already existed for some time. It's just a matter of changing the kids who show up on it to be a little deeper, digging into it. And then the other part that changes is how we'll do outreach. So right now, if a child's on that list, nothing necessarily happens. In some cases it does, and some it doesn't. But now we'll let parents know, like, hey, your kid is being considered in whatever domain it is, literacy or math or whatever comes up from the academic pieces. And again, providing them the more information and doing some outreach.
Okay, I'm going to stop right now and go to Kate, and I'm going to come back with some comments later, but I just want to, Kate and then Dean.
Yeah, I mean, I have some big picture comments. I'll maybe hold most of them, but I just maybe to start by maybe restating the obvious, which is that this has been an area of significant challenge and opportunity for our district, and so I'm really glad to be talking about it today to kind of be able to take the next step on what that journey looks like. I have kind of 3 detailed pieces of feedback, and then maybe at the end can come back to big picture. On identification, I think broadly, I feel pretty good about the clarity around different measures here, local and group norms. I'm excited to see some concreteness around what that looks like and what it might lead to. I think it leads to significantly more children being identified. And I don't know if you guys have had a chance to look at that number. I have some super rough math of my own, but do you guys have any sense of what just based on current?
Right. So again, the data that we pulled up was just based on MAP and based on the consideration roster. So some kids that show up in there will already be identified. And without knowing TOPS, I don't know. I don't want to make up a number. So
okay. I did some super rough math, so I will make up a number. But the broadly speaking, we have about 3,500, just shy of 3,500 students right now identified as advanced learners. That's, I don't know, 15-ish% in the district of our students. Yeah. So this, just kind of backing into the math, you're probably looking at 6,000, a little over 6,000, I don't know, somewhere between 5,000 and 7,000 students identified as advanced learners, which is broadly in line with national norms and norms historically in Wisconsin for students at kind of above grade level learning, which is around a third of kids, right? So that's kind of 25%, a third of kids at over grade level learning. It all feels sort of right. It also leads to, for me, a really big question around what our actual intervention looks like. We currently have 22, 23, 24-ish advanced learning specialists. That is 300 kids per specialist. Even just as a caseload, if they were doing nothing else, that is really hard for me to get my head around. And so for me, in this plan, I'm excited about the clarity on kind of identification. I think it's a good step. I don't think it's perfect, but I think it's a fantastic, clear step that will lead us in the right direction. We got to be able to serve these kids, and I just don't see a way to do that in this current plan. And I've kind of chewed on that all week. I keep going back, actually, Mary, to your kind of thoughts around experimentation, and do we pick a couple of schools and just try a completely different service delivery model that maybe doesn't rely on an ALS, that is structurally different in some way, that provides coherent instruction? That, I mean, look, you guys are the experts, but for me, there's a significant gap here in instruction. And I don't actually think just significantly increasing resources is the right answer, or a viable answer. So what does that leave? And maybe before going on to my last comment, I would actually love to hear your just reaction to that, because you obviously are deep in this field, have seen other districts.
So one of the things that comes to my mind is when you have more kids with accelerated or advanced needs, you need to look at how your school is really serving them. So I'm thinking of a school that might have, I don't know, 30 or 40% of their kids identified with some type of advanced learning needs. So at what point does that become a tipping point where the school needs to up the level of curriculum as well across the board, and accelerate just in general, and then help the kids who are below that new cut level move up forward? So whether it's like all our second graders are doing third grade curriculum, third grade core, how do we help all the kids access that? So when you have such a large number in a particular place, it's really, you just change how you're doing business in terms of core. It's not like, let's do a program for the 40% of kids and then have the other 60 do something different. It's about how do we do the universal and the targeted piece, and how do we help all of our kids at the same time? So that's my initial thought on it.
Yeah, I mean, I would be curious to hear more of alternative options and to test them, not district-wide, but test them in one or two schools and understand what that looks like. I mean, I actually went back to the state statute here to understand kind of what our obligation is, and it actually says our obligation is to deliver an AL program, right? That's has a coherence to it that, for me, and what I see in our schools right now, we are asking our grade level teachers and our ALS folks to essentially develop one-on-one curricula per kid for 3,500 kids right now, and twice that in the future, right? I mean, it's a lot to ask. So for me, it just demands a different delivery model. I think, we heard some commentary around literacy. We've started talking about leadership a little bit, music. These are all things that for me are still pretty big gaps in what I'm looking at. I think math, we all have a bit more vision around what that can look like. But even that, I mean, what good looks like right now in the district is math delivery on a computer, right? That's what good looks like. And I don't think that's good enough. So maybe the third point, just around metrics, it sounds like you guys are working on it, but I think there is obviously a need for some accountability metrics in here. part of our historic challenge has been a cultural one. It has been around kind of the belief in advanced learning, or the excitement about having children that are off to the races, right? That are gonna kind of flourish at beyond grade level instruction in whatever domain that is. And so I think for us, knowing that, we really do need some accountability metrics, not just kind of outcome metrics, but input metrics for us to be able to know that in every one of our schools, our leadership is excited about the children that are capable of kind of amazing things and ready to do that maybe a little sooner than some of their peers. So,
Dean, Mary wanted to step in first just a second, if that's all right. Go ahead.
Just because it's on the same
Get your
point as Kate's, with regards to the number of students and then how, I think that the other consideration that I think about in terms of meeting the needs of going from 3,500 to, it's probably somewhere 5,000-6,000, right? Because you can just look at, you can't get to that pie chart change without a lot of more students being included. So the thing about what you had said that that then occurred to me is the additional challenge we have is not the 40% or the 35% and the 65% or the 40% and the 60%, is that in many of our classrooms, we have 25% or so who are way below grade level. And that's the challenge. That's why I don't think it's just to say that the teachers can differentiate instruction within that type of range when you have that many above grade level, so many below grade level, and at grade level. What's your perspective on also teachers in that same classroom at the same time,
Right. Well,
meeting such a wide range?
I think for part of it, and again, part of it is my experience as a principal is really thinking about how do you build school structures that can maximize your ability to meet the needs of kids. So whether it's all math instruction among a certain span of grades is at the same time. So it could be like a walking math, and it can be flexible. It doesn't mean tracking. It doesn't mean necessarily even clustering. It might mean like this group of children need help on a particular skill, they're going to go to this teacher today or for this week. And this group, it needs something accelerated, they're going to this other teacher for this day or this week. So knowing that it can be fluid and flexible, but a lot of that depends on scheduling. Also thinking about in what cases does it make more sense to accelerate a student either whole grade or specific academics. So if I have a second grader doing 5th grade math, in some cases it makes more sense to move them up to a 3rd or 4th grade class. In some cases it doesn't. It does go back to depending on the kid's needs, also social and emotional. Some kids are quite ready to do that, and some it comes back to the classroom. But it also comes back to how are we making clusters of kids so that kids are not just identified but feel that they have like peers in the groups, and so that they're not isolated or alone. But I think a lot of it is structuring. It's easier to meet the needs of kids when you have less of a range, I agree, but that's why we need to move kids around in a flexible manner, and also teach teachers to help them differentiate, which they're already doing, and help them figure out how to plan for it on the front end. So I think it's a couple of different solutions, and in some cases you might have a school where it's only 1 or 2 children in that context, and in another you might have 10. So it's very school specific in a way too, which is why I really think the school level implementation plans will help to do that.
It gets much harder with small classrooms, right? It's 17 or 18 students in a room, and you've got, you break down your quarter, and maybe have differences between math and literacy and leadership. It gets much more challenging. We have a lot of K through 2 schools, 3 through 5, right? Like, the scheduling is no small feat, and so I would encourage, to get out into some of the buildings and see kind of what the best we have looks like, because I think there are some real challenges out there in terms of intervention.
Dean and then Nikki.
Yeah, thanks. I kind of fit right in. Yeah, it's good that Mary went first, 'cause I appreciate your comments about your itch to get implementing this thing, I work the same way. Because as Chris mentioned, she can talk for 3 minutes or 3 days, or indeed 4.5 years since I've been on the board. Chris and a bunch of others here have been coming and giving us good stuff.
Yeah.
They put a lot more time into this than I have been able to do, and it's been really, really helpful. So I have some implementation questions.
Yeah.
One of our speakers talked about not being able to get his daughter, who was identified as a AL and literacy, and not feeling comfortable enough that her needs weren't getting met. So can you give us an example of how a teacher would address a child in their classroom, or what would an AL specialist do to help someone who's identified as advanced in literacy?
Mm-hmm.
How would you, what would an example of a differentiated curriculum be for someone like that? What does someone do? What's our plan to address that need? And then I have another question after that.
Okay. So I mean, part of it also depends on how great their need is. So in some cases we do greater subject acceleration. So again, if you have a fourth grader, it may make sense in some contexts to move them to fifth or even sixth grade. As far as differentiation with literacy, we have some kids who do the Wicanti, the online programming. But knowing online is not a solution really for most. It's like, how do we differentiate in the instruction? So thinking about how can teachers group. So if are there other kids in the same situation in the class? So can they have a more in-depth text, or is there a different independent study or group option where they're doing the same things as the classroom, but they have a different set of text, or maybe they're looking at it through a different lens, and looking back at the Common Core state standards and seeing literacy, how they scaffold up, and really seeing what kind of materials to put in front of students and how to support them reading through, close reading through difficult texts, and giving them higher order thinking questions, and really just, a lot of it comes down to having peers that they can talk with, communicate, work with, collaborate with, while the teacher supports their inquiry. So a lot of what I've seen successful in small group models is whether it's like I do, we do, you do type of thing, or a small groups rotating through centers where the teacher's able to meet with the different groups and provide them those supports in the classroom. So it's the same with like writing or writing workshops. So when you're meeting with different groups of kids, it's not necessarily all the same thing. You're talking about writing, but you're talking about what are the child's specific needs. So I would say the teacher would want to look through map data, see where in the continuum the child's falling, and what areas they need some more support, and what areas they're already performing well. So I think a lot of it comes down to how we collaborate with the content area teams to make sure we're not just tacking stuff on, and also how we can support teachers in implementation. So there's also plenty of enrichment programs, but again, those are enrichment. While they're good and they help children in a lot of ways, we want to make sure the core instruction is what we're focusing our time on. So I guess the answer is it's more complicated than, we don't have a program, right? We have approach and services and supports.
Yeah, you laid out a whole laundry list of things that could get done, and perhaps Mike, you could send him your specific problems of why you felt that your kid wasn't getting their needs met. I would be curious to know, because I know a lot of teachers are already doing that.
Yeah.
All across our schools, without even dealing with knowing that if a kid is AL or not. They're doing that already, many of them. So it's not new. That's something that we've been doing as a practice for a long time, probably not as focused as what you want to try to implement here. The other question I have is another speaker asked about communicating this to our staff, and also some concerns about not involving them enough in the planning of this. It was mentioned in here that explicit and targeted communication practices is one of our goals here, and that's good. And then implementation of that is the key to all this stuff. Everyone's seen wonderful plans and never got implemented properly. So can you talk a little more about that specifically? How are you going to get this across to people? And the other one is when we identify people, and to people that don't even know that there is an AL system. So around targeting kids, so I'm kind of combining two questions here. One is, can you talk a little bit more about targeting communication practices, and along with not only to our staff, but also to families who have no clue what AL is, and whether or not they should get into it. So I'm looking for, I always look for real aggressive outreach plans and implementation plans when we talk about going after kids that have been systematically excluded in the past from programs like this. Not purposely, but they've been excluded largely because of sometimes because of not even knowing about it. So let's get the information to them and then welcome them in. So two things: talk more about the targeted communication, and then targeted outreach. I want to know a little bit more about that too.
Okay. In terms of teachers, I mean, it's in the next couple of bulletins coming out over the summer. Teachers are on summer, but the idea is the implementation is the important part for me. After we figure out the wording and the plan and such, and making sure we address needs, but really making sure that teachers are there at the table. And that's why I keep going back to it's a living document, because when we get a teacher advisory group together, they're going to have really important feedback, and it might be, their targeted feedback might be really important, but also their overall pieces to it. So making sure we're getting their input, because if we're wanting to support teachers in differentiating and meeting the needs of kids with AL needs or identifiers, we've really got to support teachers and embrace them and take their feedback. Otherwise, like you said, it's just a piece of paper, and that's useless. So a lot of that is a professional development on the advanced learning staff, the coaching PD, how to support teacher teams, and how to work with the school level implementation plan, the principal, the advanced learning specialist, and the school leadership team to make sure that what is happening for AL is embedded in the different content areas and throughout the school. So it's really going to take a lot of partnership with principals and with school staff, because if it's just an AL staff by themselves, nothing's going to happen. So it's got to really be seen as this is part of how instruction happens in Madison and how we meet different kids' needs, and I think that exists through the culturally linguistic responsive practices, through the great teaching frameworks, through all these things that are already there. It's just how do we make sure AL is more embedded in them is one of the things, one of the groups that we need to take a look at. So I think that's part, and as far as more outreach, right, I think that's a big piece, is like many people don't know what AL is, or don't, at this point, if they don't know, you don't necessarily care what it is. And once you get a letter home about, or email or a call or some combination about, we found something really interesting or possibly accelerated or exciting about your child, and we want to share and collaborate, it's going to take outreach not just from the AL staff at the schools, but it's got to be an embracing of the teaching staff and the principals of we're together to support kids, and different kids have different needs, but how can we together support kids? So it's a much larger picture than just here's a shiny letter with a nice picture. It's got to be like meaningful and deeper, and part of that will be working with OMGE and the FACE department and communications, and figuring out what venues exist that we can either go to, or what other organizations can we get feedback from who might not have known about AL in the past. So it's going to be a year of really trial and error and figuring out how to access different groups and how to really partner with people who might not have been involved with AL or heard of it, but at the same time making sure our partnerships with parents and groups who already have been invested with AL, that we continue to nurture and build those as well. So it's a lot of pieces.
I would also add, and Ethan, you said it earlier, but just to expand on it, so as we've done with our other plans, we've followed up with the Teaching and Learning Institute in June. Aligned to the first one we did was our ELL plan. We brought in Aida Walke, and she's actually back now working specifically with 4 or 5 of our middle schools doing professional development. We just finished our Special Education Teaching and Learning Institute, and we are planning to focus our next institute around advanced learning. And not only does that sort of raise awareness of the work that has to happen, it also allows us to tap some of our own resources. We have some actually great teachers who are doing much of this. And some of those folks present content and share what they've learned. But I think, these places are always good opportunities for teachers to get together and talk about how do you share ownership for students across the school. They're all of our kids. And if you have, and I say that about special education all the time too, is, you create a school system. And we all teach. Doesn't matter what grade, we all teach. And if there's a little one in first grade that has a math need, a 5th grade teacher may be able to meet that child's needs through some flexible grouping. And we also have to grapple with that language of inclusivity. We talked in the special education plan and even our ELL plan around inclusive environments and flexible grouping and cluster grouping. And people get different ideas about that. And those words are placed sort of in different contexts. And we want to give people an opportunity to grapple with that and think about what high quality core is and do some of the how. Like we've got the what here, but the how sometimes we need to go back to. I think we sometimes forget that. So being really intentional and thoughtful about that planning in June, and then Sue and her department of professional learning will pull that strand through. Like this year, our strand through our coach PD and our principal PD is around special education, following up on the institute. So we want to be really intentional about that. So that's just something intentional Dee and I wanted to sort of put out there for us to chew on a little bit.
I'm going to take a couple more. First off, I want to say that I share similar concerns with the numbers with Kate and expressed by others also, and especially when we look at not only the numbers, but we're going to be asking this plan, this program, these people to support not only more diverse demographically, but much more diverse needs. And a couple people floated the term at grade level. If I read the histograms correctly, we're going to go that 20% in some demographic groups will take us to students who are below grade level, and that's a very, very different demand on an ALS, an advanced learning specialist, and that we're looking very much at potential and capability as opposed to achievement. And in some ways, we're forcing, kind of two groups into one category, with very different needs. And so I share the concerns that have been expressed by others that that our capacity is at issue. And though this would be very difficult to do, I almost would advise pulling back on both and going, 5 and 10 instead of 10 and 20, and say that we have the capacity to provide programming and services for that number, or we believe we do, or something like that. Now, I realize that people would not want their children pulled out of this, but I really hate to try and do all things for all people and end up doing very little very well. So that's just the kind of a generalized concern, and maybe what Kate was talking about, and I think referenced Mary also around piloting and trying different things at different schools, and recognizing that our schools are very different, and even our grade levels are different. A 4th grade in one school might have a distribution that looks like this, and a 5th grade has a different one. Which, just a quick aside, is that when you described about students moving between groups and classrooms and different teachers, I went to a grade school that had was 3 grades in a particular classroom, team taught with 5 teachers, 4 teachers in a team. We moved. That's exactly what we did. I mean, it was not for everything, but I went to Mr. Moody's class for science with whatever people drawing from other classes. It allowed that kind of flexibility that's hard to achieve, particularly in small schools, but also within single grades and scheduling. So that's kind of comment number 1, that I share those concerns very, very much. Comment number 2 is taking an identification from a different level. I still don't see a nonverbal. identification tool on here in terms of assessments. And I really think that's important. And I checked, we had a little brief chat around the COGAT. And it appears that there are instructions for the COGAT in Spanish, and that we can provide support for Spanish speakers, but nothing for any other languages. And we have, God, what, 30-something, 40-something, I don't know how many languages we have spoken in our district. What's that? Close to it. We have lots, lots. We'll just go with lot. So there's Spanish instructions available, and there's support for English language learners that can be done. But I'm concerned that if our assessments, MAP is not, MAP and COGAT are the two written assessments, and I really think that adding a nonverbal, even if it's only as an alternate assessment, would be really something that I think I would like to see there.
We have the Naglieri.
I don't think was it on the list?
No, it's one of the supplemental
Okay,
ones.
I
It's
don't
not
even
a
see it on the
universal.
supplemental list. I mean, maybe I missed it, but I don't think it's there. So
Okay.
I'd be glad to see if it can be there by the time we vote on this. That would make sure
Okay.
it's there, because I don't think it is. Maybe I missed it. Lisa's looking. What's that? Which kind of brings up the other thing. Well, one other thing is that you spoke briefly during the presentation about the content strategy stuff with math. And what I'm hearing from both parents and others and board members is that they'd like to see a content strategy for science, a content strategy for literacy, a content strategy for writing. And I truly trust that that is in your plan, but it's not in your plan. And I think that before we pass that, I think that people would have confidence if developing those content strategies was explicitly in the plan. And I mean, I know this is what you plan to do, so let's make the commitment in the plan. And I think that, and then the last piece I want to talk about a little bit is the accountability piece. And I see accountability kind of being kind of two forking things and fork up. One is, are our staff doing the things we said they would be doing, right? And that's just kind of the, what kind of, are we making progress? And, do we have the slips in place? Have we worked on the content strategy? How many HOPE assessments, how many TOPS assessments have we done? That kind of piece, right? How much professional development? So that's kind of one area of accountability. The other has to do with students. And this one, for me, forks out into three directions. One is results. I mean, just results. Some measurable forms of learning, be it enrollment in high school honors courses, be it MAP scores, some measurable thing. The second is activities. What percentage of students are doing what? What kind of interventions are reaching them? And that, that obviously interacts with what the adults are doing. But we've done this with the behavior education plan, where we really we've gone from just looking at these raw numbers of incidents to really trying to focus on what kind of responses, what kind of interventions, what are we doing? And then the next question is, well, what's working, right? But that's step three. And then a third is, I think there needs to be some kind of climate piece in here. How are advanced learning? And I hate survey data. It always bugs me. But I think it's got to be here. Parent climate survey, student climate survey, and things like that. One of the things, and I don't know what we're going to, I also am very sympathetic to those who say that the teachers haven't had a whole lot of time to look this over and give input. I know I got an email either yesterday or today from MMSD asking me to click and give feedback, and I'm going, well, I think I'll do that tonight. But the point is that parents haven't really, except for those who are involved in the advanced learning community, haven't really seen much either. And I guess having heard all this and the asks from me and others for things that we would like to see before we vote on it, I understand you have the principal professional development scheduled for October on this, and I don't think that would necessarily have to, be hijacked. If what would the harm be of giving you and your team time to do further outreach, to hone in on these things, and come back at us not September 25th, but October and/or November, depending on that, was something that people felt they had more ownership of. And I mean, what would, would there be, if there's, what would the harm be, I guess is my question, besides the principal PD?
My worry is, in the interim, are the advanced learning staff working under the old plan or under the proposed new plan? Because that's 2 months of time we could be serving children. That's my worry.
Yeah, TJ had some similar thoughts that this feels rushed, just because of the timeline, not because of intention, not because of lack of concern or care, but whether it's getting teacher input, whether it's looking at, okay, if you identify this many more students, how are we going to meet the needs? I wonder if another option to, rather than 2 months, because I'm not sure even 2 months, is this to me feels much more like a framework than it does a plan. I think a plan has a lot more detail in it, a lot more implementation, that it has that higher teacher input. And I wondered if, as a board, because I don't see anything in here that I disagree with, and I haven't heard anything that people disagree, it just feels like it's lacking the meat. And I wondered if we could approve modify the name to be the framework, and then what the next 6 months is gathering all this and looking, and then having a real, or a more muscular, let's say, plan. And I certainly even believe that we should be honest with ourselves in terms of how much work and how much time this is really going to take. And I think if we were, this is something that will take 10 years or more to achieve to the level that I think we want to see in this district. And so would a plan, in fact, break down and say, yes, this is the vision, but here's what we feel we can commit to and we can do, and our teachers feel that they can do, all these different factors that looks for this will be our focus in the next 3 years, given this. I don't know, but I feel like it has, that's personally what I would love to see when I approve a plan, whether it's the 10-year or the 3-year, but something that has a lot more, that you've been able to spend more time on, that you've been able to put that type of detail and analysis into.
Jen, then Nikki.
Actually, let Nikki
Or
go
Nikki, then
first,
Jen.
and then I'll, yeah.
One, I have to agree with Mary. This is more strategic framework to me than a plan. You guys have worked excellently, and I don't mean to criticize, but I'm a quote person, so you're going to hear a lot of quotes out of me. And one of my favorites is, failure to plan is planning to fail. It's John Wooden, one of the fathers of basketball. But very simply, you need it spelled out in a way so that it's understood at the beginning by every person. Otherwise, you'll never catch up and you'll never get them on the same page. And that's what I worry about. But the other issues I have a couple on the framework itself. One, on the pulling out of the clustering. How do we avoid segregated learning? I don't want to have a complete segregation either, because I believe that multiple abilities in one classroom can be helpful. The organization piece on leadership, to determine leadership, I think the idea is excellent, but when you lack executive function skills, which aren't fully developed till the age of 26, I'm not sure an 8-year-old or 10-year-old, 12-year-old has enough of the organization skills to really be able to see the leadership potential. I think you can see it a lot of ways, but organizing things may not be it. But that's my own personal And my one other one is on the literacy of the K through 2. I do believe in the nonverbal. Additionally, I worry about the phonics part of it. There are a large number of sight readers, large number of ESL, individuals with disabilities, etc., who are sight readers, who do not do phonics whatsoever, who may be reading well above grade level, but will never pass a phonics test. And I do worry about how that would work. And again, I don't want to destroy your work. That's not my whole goal. I just want to make it the best that it can
I
be.
appreciate it.
Jen?
Yeah, I've, you know, it's interesting. I've been thinking along the same lines as I've heard the conversation ensue tonight, and I think there are a couple things going on. One is we are rewriting the strategic framework this year, and I know a lot of us have been talking about what it's going to take in the next phase of our work as a district to really drive for excellence, right? And excellence as an equity strategy. There is something out of sync with approving the AL plan while we're re-envisioning where we need to go next as a district. So I think that's partly we're a little bit trapped in between the two strategic frameworks. I'm feeling that right now. I think that the resource, the number of kids we might identify or that we predict is likely, I agree, I think the numbers are going to go up too, and we had that discussion earlier today. And for sure, there's going to be some implications for how services are provided and how resources are allocated. It's a little bit of a chicken and egg situation, right? Like we actually need to know how these new cut scores and ways of identifying might actually play out. I mean, I think we should plan in that direction, but without having a more solid understanding, and with the budget cycle being out of sync with when this plan gets approved, it's just raising some difficulty. So I guess I'm wondering, and I'm going to ask the team here, like let's just figure it out in the moment maybe, but I am wondering, I don't want to delay using the new approach to identification. That is, I think, my major concern in this moment, because we lose a whole year of identifying students who could be who we could be better serving this year. So I'm trying to figure out if there's a middle ground. Can we move ahead with at least using a new set of indicators for identification while we wait on approving a much more robust, detailed, rich plan for how we provide services to students in the future? So I'm curious about what you guys think about that.
I just want to step in for a second.
Yeah.
Ethan, when I first suggested, Ethan has said, would my people be working under the old plan or the new plan? And I just want to
Yeah.
answer, my assumption, and this picks up on the identification piece, would be under the new plan.
Okay.
And I think
so
that that's what
too.
Jen's talking about. And in fact, I think
We don't
that-
want to hold you back.
I think that
right?
if we were
Yeah.
using wider
Right.
identification
Exactly.
procedures, this would get us actually some sense that would inform what actually
That's my
should
other
go into a
thought.
plan. I mean, 6 months from now,
Yes.
we're gonna have some hard numbers for who went through the consideration,
Yep.
and
Right.
those kind of things. So that's just now. Laura, did you have something?
Yeah.
Okay, I've been trying. Got to wave over here because Jen's between us. So
Oh, okay.
Laura,
Sorry.
Anna, and Kate.
Okay, friends, just going back a little bit. I've heard like the term like clustering a lot, and I'm assuming that that means like clustering by like ability group rather than like grade level, or how is that different from like self-selection into honors courses?
I think clustering we use in a couple of ways, so I should probably avoid the word altogether. But the idea for me is that it's flexible groups that can change based on need. So it might be, instead of, if you have one student who's really, working advanced in some particular math topic, instead of having them off by themselves, if there's another one in a different class and another in a third, why aren't those three together around that topic? So the idea that if there's multiple students with the same needs, a teacher can meet with a 3 or 4, whatever it is. So, and again, knowing it would be flexible based on what the needs are and in content. Other ways that clustering has been used, that term is putting smaller groups of students in each of the classrooms too. So it's not like if there's 15 kids at this grade level, we don't put all 15 in the same room and make a separate program, but maybe 5, 5, and 5 or something. So that's kind of what it means.
Is one or the other like more commonly practiced in schools?
I think it depends by district. Within Madison, I don't know. I've seen different things in different schools. I think that's one of the things is us providing clearer guidance around what ideal looks like.
Yeah, I just think that I think that scheduling could be part of this
Yeah.
too, in terms of I think experimentation, but also we've been talking a lot about like relationship building, and I think that's really crucial for everybody. But I think when we're talking about more like specialized like one-on-one services, I think that those relationships are really important, and I think that like more innovative scheduling could help that.
Okay, Anna and Kate.
Just timeline as well, thinking about it. I know this was our 5th year, and I think a focus area for this 5th year was going to be UDL, and I believe Universal Design for Learning.
Right.
And that did get tabled.
Yeah.
So I think that has to come back into consideration, particularly because so much of this plan is built upon differentiation. And so I think it's really going to be critical that we get our staff up and running around the differentiation piece as we move forward on this plan.
You know, Anne, I'm glad you mentioned that because it didn't quite come out in our comments, but the Teaching and Learning Institute that would happen this June, our thinking was that UDL would be the umbrella and that there would be kind of a sub-focus on advanced learning. So I'm just glad you brought that out. Our heads are in the same place.
Kate?
So I mean, I guess I kind of wanted to go back, Jen, to something that you said, which is this kind of is our vision as a school district, right? I mean, excellence with equity is literally what we're talking about.
It is literally
you
what we're
could
talking
not have written a plan that was more targeted at excellence with equity, right?
Yeah.
Like this is what we as an entire district are trying to do. It's not one segment, even a large segment, right? If we're talking about a third of our kids, it's not a small segment, even if you think about it as a segment, but like this is literally what we exist to do. And so I can get my head around kind of moving forward where we're at from an identification perspective, but I don't want to lose the urgency around going farther. And I think that sometimes it is difficult to identify children, right? We are all saying that we know kids are coming that are brilliant to our schools and are not getting identified for support and services that will help breathe life into that brilliance. Like that's what we're all saying, and we're saying pause for a year and changing how we actually do that intervention, the support, the part that actually executes on the vision. So I don't want to lose some of the urgency, and I think sometimes staff are reluctant to identify students if there's no landing pad, right? What do you do right now if you identify a student, an English language learner in kindergarten who's brilliant, right? Who just learns half the English language in a week or whatever, right? Which I watched happen in my son's kindergarten class, and isn't maybe going to, what's the intervention, right? We don't have that right now, and it's incumbent on our ALSs to design a one-on-one support for each of those children. So I think it's a little bit of an if you build it, they will come. And so I don't know if there's a way to come up with a couple of those pilots this year and commit to doing that, right? So that we could start next year, not approve a plan in June to plan for a year to start the year following, right? But I don't want to lose the foot on the gas pedal a little bit. It's something we've taken a lot of whacks at and didn't really move the needle yet.
Yeah, I don't think Ethan wants to do that either. And well, another way to go, and this is another version of Mary's suggestion, the framework versus the plan versus kind of light versus heavy, or would be to approve a 17-18 plan. And it would commit ourselves to moving forward on the the school level implementation plan, which we got to start doing if we're going to hold schools accountable. And I mean, we would probably do it anyway. It allows us to start using better approaches to identification, better communication systems now as opposed to in the future. But it gives us the go-ahead for this year and holds us accountable for coming back with a much richer, more robust plan in alignment with the next strategic framework. Is the thought?
I think we can wrap this up in a minute. I see that there's a few different things that could happen between now and September 25th. We can see a revised framework. We can see a 2017-18 plan.
Yeah.
Maybe we can see a framework with pilots, or I guess that these are things
Good
that
feedback, yeah.
you know, to consider as possibilities, and there's probably other possibilities I didn't even mention. But and I think that at this point we've kind of, you know, exhausted this for now, and I think that you have to do some more thinking and brainstorming and going from there. So if anyone has any final comments, we should wrap this up and move on to the other item on the agenda.
Yeah, my thoughts in regards to the 25th is if we're going to look at it as either a framework or a one-year plan, either way, whatever, I don't care about the language, but
Yeah.
same thing.
Yeah.
And knowing that, I kept saying it's a living document anyway, it really gives us time to build out the actual practices, because I don't want to lose traction on the ID or the school level implementation plan.
Yeah.
And knowing that it's going to take more than 2 weeks to engage all the content area teams,
That's right.
OMGE and the specialized services to get their input. And if we're going to be authentic about getting teacher input, 2 weeks is not enough time. So I'd love
That's
to see
right.
the 1 year approval, which whatever we call it, so I can move on the things I think are going to really help us, and then build out the service delivery with the other
Yeah.
teams over the year. And I think
I
for
love
me,
that.
having not even seen a school year, that's,
Yeah, exactly.
that would really help me.
That would help.
So,
Yeah.
so this feedback's been great. So
Excellent, excellent. I think we're in a really good spot, so I appreciate
just
it.
One other thing to request is that if whatever you kind of come as far as recommendations, framework, and things like that, if you can get maybe not the final version, but large pieces of it to us a week in advance, we can give some feedback instead of the Thursday before the vote kind of thing, and maybe not the final one, but just large pieces of it or a sketch or something like that, so that we can, you know, because we won't meet to talk about it so till the 25th, and so that way we can do that, because I think that's, because I'm not quite sure what we're going to see.
Yeah.
Right. Does it-
Okay, well, I think we have to debrief, and we'll
Yeah.
let you know where we land and what we can
Yeah, I
produce
guess that's
by
what I'm trying to
when.
think is
You got it.
yeah.
Yep,
Yeah.
we will do that.
All right.
You got it.
Well, thank you very much for
Thanks.
the work
Thank
and
you. Thank you, Ethan.
the
Thanks, Lisa.
and the responsiveness. So,
thank you.
all right. And Mary and Mary has a previous engagement, and so she is exiting at exactly 6:40, which is what she warned us.
That's
Good
amazing.
timing.
Thanks,
Good
Mary.
timing.
TJ, it was your facilitation, of course. Thank you.
And we have one other item on the agenda, which is an initial version of a partnership with Madison Technical College, known as Madison Area Technical College, Madison College, STEM Early College, and Alex and Cindy, I believe, are.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone else is.
Nope, just
Doing
those,
this?
those
Okay.
two. Thanks, TJ. And this is an informational update for the board. No action required at this point, but we want you to know what's going on. We're excited about it, and we want to make sure everyone is apprised of our emerging and potentially transformational partnership with Madison College. So I'll pass it over to Alex.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, we are more than excited about this emerging partnership with Madison College, and I do want to thank the board members who were present at the announcement at the Villager 2 weeks ago. For those of you in the room, you felt the energy in the room. I've been to a lot of announcements and community events, but none like that before. Given the spectrum of those who attended, the applause, the discussions afterwards. I got 2 emails from parents who said, how do I get my kids signed up immediately? And so we're excited that Madison College has really kind of deepened their partnership with us to meet one of our goals, which is to improve or increase access to rigorous coursework. We see dual credited courses as advanced coursework, and so we're excited about the possibility of expanding that for students. I do want to thank Dr. Jack Daniels, Keith Corneli, the Vice President, and Kevin Myris. And of course Cindy and our team who have been working their butts off to get this thing off the ground, which we're also excited about. So tonight our goal is just to kind of give you an update, kind of walk you through some of the items in the memo, and to answer any questions you have about this emerging partnership. In addition to the goal of increasing access to advanced coursework, we know we want to ensure that we're also expanding opportunities, particularly for females and students of color, to STEM learning. Given they are often underrepresented in both STEM courses and in the STEM field, we see this as an opportunity to expand access for those students as well. The early college model has been around for quite some time. We're a little bit behind the game. I think given the limited access that we currently provide our students, we've got some courses, they're not systematic, and we have some equipment that's not systematic. And I think this partnership will again provide our students access to not only the facilities and the equipment to make this learning palpable and tangible, but help us to develop the type of skills that would advance our students in 21st century learning. So we do see this as a game changer. We're excited to learn from this phase one, which Cindy's going to kind of walk us through both the timeline and some of the major elements of the partnership.
Hi, everyone. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about phase one, which is going to be the initial phase over at our Truax campus that will start in 2018-19 for approximately 25 students. And then I'm going to talk about kind of the second phase that will move into the South Campus, which was part of the announcement. So students would attend their regular neighborhood high school for 9th and 10th grade. And then next year for our phase one, approximately 25 students from East and La Follette would attend junior and senior year over at the Madison Truax campus, where they would be both our students, MMSD students, and also duly enrolled as Madison College students. While over at the Truax campus, students will be taught by both the Madison College faculty, and our goal is also to have some of our MMSD teachers teaching some of those courses as well. Students are going to have access, as Alex mentioned, to STEM labs, equipment, hands-on learning. Madison Truax campus has just beautiful facilities for engineering, for IT, for manufacturing, so students will have the ability to take courses in those areas, as well as some of the other elective offerings as their schedule permits. One of the things we want to ensure happens is we want students to still be part of their home school and connected because they are MMSD students. So their day will end in time for them to come back to their home school if they're involved in any clubs, extracurricular activities, athletics, all of those things that students like to engage in outside of the regular school hours. Students will have access to that. And then our students will also have access to the academic and the career and counseling services that Madison College has. In addition to that, we've been thinking about this kind of selection process or this initial identification process. And for our first phase students, we have landed on an identification criteria that is a GPA of 2.5 or above in the core academic areas. And right now for East and La Follette, our 10th grade students, we have 398 students that fit that window that would be eligible for this first phase. And again, thinking about 25 students, we have a nice range of students that we have to choose from. Students would then go through this application process where they would complete an application, and then we'd go through an interview process as well, and our goal would be to select the 25 students by February of 2018. That timeline is really important for our high schools because that's about the same time when our students start engaging in their course selection for the following year. So we want our students to know, am I going to be at my home school or am I going to be engaging in this amazing opportunity over at the Truax campus? There's a timeline. I won't go through every aspect of the timeline, but I'll highlight a couple areas of the timeline that I think are probably really important. As I mentioned, October, we're going to start that initial identification list of students with an application process and engaging families kind of around like, what is this and what do you want to know about this, so that students can consider this as an option next year. Then in November, we are going to work on, and you will see our medium intensity MOA, which is going to be for our first phase of this work for the 2018 through 2020 school year, which will be for the students attending the Truax campus, those 25 students. We will have the applications due in December. We're going to engage in a joint board meeting between us and Madison College, so we're excited about that as well. January, we'll do student interviews. Students will be selected in February. And then we'll circle back around in June where we're engaged in really solidifying this partnership in a high intensity and start to focus on the implementation of the South Campus, which will be where the next cohort of students would attend beginning in 2019. Summer, students are going to go through a boot camp that we call it, where they're going to work with Madison College really around some of the student supports they have, some things to help gear them up for not just a high school life, but also what it would be like to take courses on a college campus. And then in 2018 in the fall, we will launch the phase 1 at the Truax campus. So, go ahead.
Just one.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. I was. Yeah.
I misunderstood.
Yeah.
I misunderstood. I'm sorry.
There was a pause.
Yeah,
There was
sorry.
a pause.
Yeah, because I was excited about the first phase that we're going to engage in, again, because this is a great option for our students. And then in school year 1920 is when we will actually launch our South Madison campus of our early college STEM academy with that next cohort of students. So that's the end of the timeline. I'll turn it over to Alex to see if he wants to add anything else, and then Nikki.
Yeah, thank you. So the only thing I failed to mention is to thank was MTI, who is actually very helpful to us, both their executive committee and the teachers who are part of the initial teacher advisory group that's actually grown from 2 to 4, now 15, have been very helpful in giving us excellent feedback, and we expect that they're going to be a part of this design process to make sure that we're looking at this from all ends. So I wanted to also recognize them and also be clear that there's another goal here, which is to ensure that we are recruiting and attracting and helping teachers, more teachers to be qualified to teach dual credit courses. And not just this particular pilot program where kids are actually taking courses on a college campus, but actually to increase those courses in our high schools. So kids are getting the access to dual credit, dual transcript courses, and us helping teachers to become more qualified to do so. So they provided great feedback. Yeah.
Nikki.
What I wanted to say is, one, this is an amazing opportunity, and I'm thrilled. My only question is on the attendance rate. What happens if you have a student who's brilliant in STEM and happens to be homeless, or is caring for a sick relative and doesn't have a 90% attendance? I don't want to necessarily leave them out solely based on that.
Anna, unless there was a response to that.
No, I'm just taking that as a thinking about attendance consideration, so thank you for that.
Yeah, I have similar concerns around the selection criteria. I've brought this up before, and I have a concern for our district, is that we continue to create programs that are meeting the needs of our middle to above students, and we're really not designing stuff for our students that are significantly at risk. And so if we look at MAP scores for African American students, 90% are basic and minimal, 93 students with disabilities, basic and minimal, low income, these same numbers. I worry that if this is a program that's targeting students that haven't had access to that, by putting in a 2.5 GPA and 90% attendance, you're effectively taking out a massive group of our students who will not meet that eligibility. And then when you put on top of that then an application and interview process, you're adding barriers for students that already face tremendous barriers in our district. So I think there's a lot of potential here, but I just am concerned that we are not targeting our student groups that are really desperately seeking resources and need these opportunities. So
kind of echo Anna on that there are opportunities here and some really good potential, but I do worry about where the energy and creativity is going for our district for this partnership, which again, as Anna says, that, you know, it's another program that targets our doing fine and above kind of level of students. And, you know, we have a crisis with students who we're failing with. I mean, we have, you know, Anna quoted some numbers, but, you know, you look at, you know, we have a significant percentage of students who are 3, 4, 5, 6 years below grade level. And demographically, these are primarily students of color and primarily low-income students and primarily students with disabilities. And to being invested in another program for students who are already doing well concerns me. And so, and I think that in some ways Madison College, you know, Madison College could actually probably offer something, partnerships, and we actually have some partnerships with Madison College for students who aren't doing as well, that I would rather kind of see energy go into expanding those than this. So, and as I think as this matures, we need to kind of, you know, keep a focus on who's being served and how they're being served. With that, I've got some questions also. One is, how is the cost figure? Jen, you want to comment on that, and then I'll go to my questions.
Yeah, I actually think, given that 3 board members have commented on the criteria, it's worth pausing on it for a minute, if that's all right.
Yeah,
TJ,
yeah.
do you guys want to talk a little bit about the discussion with Madison College and why and how, at least for the first phase, you've been honing in on this set of criteria? So I just think it's worth sharing a little bit more about the why. And whether or not there's opportunity to adjust it for the first phase.
Yeah, so I would say there's always opportunity. For us, it's initial, and it's one of the reasons why with phase 1, the small number of students and looking through, as we go through the application process, learning from that. So I would always say there's opportunity. We landed on that range based on some other programs that exist at Madison College that do similar dual credit opportunities, as well as what we learned from some of the research that is happening across the nation around early college programming, and then working with our research department to find what I would call the sweet spot, or where we had the largest number of females, students of color, represented in that area. So that is kind of where we landed. We also used some of the information that we know from AVID in terms of just as another program that focuses on our kids of color, first generation. So we used that as well to gain some of the interview processes and application. So we pulled from a couple different places, and I would not say it's perfect. I think that was kind of based on the data that we ran. We saw a sweet spot and looked like we had a good representation of students to think about this first cohort, and then would adjust accordingly and can still look at other considerations. We also are working with our counselors because we wanted to do a lot of individual tapping for our students, but yeah, it's a draft.
And I think we'll learn a lot too in this first go around. I think the criteria that was developed in thinking about the rigor of the program, the courses that were going to be offered in this kind of draft program of study, I would agree that we have a significant need of students who this program may not serve right now. But TJ, you actually highlighted a couple of those programs or partnerships with Madison College where we are doing that. I think in some ways we're actually doing that relatively well. If you think about Campus Connect, Gateway College, Middle College, and I think expansion of those programs that are actually giving us consistent results for those groups of students is something we should consider just as much as we're considering this as well.
Just a couple other questions, and just to try and get a little clarity on so the student goes there they're in 11th grade, and so they would be taking pre-college math, and that would not be a dual credit course, would be their math. I mean, I guess I'm trying to figure out what kind of balance do you foresee in between what is high school credit being earned at MATC and and dual credit, and how what kind of balance do you foresee?
So right now, most of the courses that the child would take over in Truex campus for 11th and 12th grade are dual transcripted credits, even the math credits. We have a couple different paths or trajectories that students could take. Students have the ability to do more of a math science focus and could actually graduate senior year with all of their graduation requirements as well as an associate's in science, being eligible to enter into a university as a junior. Students also could take more of an engineering route where the majority of their classes will be dual transcripted credit, but not all of their classes based on programming and based on where they would go after Madison College. But students are simultaneously, that math class is earning the graduation requirements here for MMSD as well as the college credit. Okay. There is one course that we've already outlined, just to give you one more example, one course that we've outlined as the first semester of junior year, which is called College to Reading and Writing course, which we feel like is kind of like that pre-course before they engage. All students would take that, and that is the one course that is not a dually transcripted credited course.
Okay, I just want to make sure that, and I'm sure your team's aware of this, but highlight it anyway, is that some of the things that might apply to associate's degree do not apply to UW transfer. And particularly mathematics is an area where there's only, you have to, for the UW transfer program out of the technical college system, mathematics, English courses, there's a variety of other courses that would apply to an associate's degree but would not apply to as transfer credit. And so just to be hyper aware on that, and also be explicit about it when we're talking about program evaluation and things like that, to make that differentiation for what's transferable via the UW liberal arts transfer program and what's the associate's degree. So
just to give you a little insight into that, as we've been partnering and working with Madison College, we've been talking about, once we have the final program of study of, like, I wear my parent hat all the time, so as a parent wanting to know this particular course, what is the transferable credit? Right. So we're going to have that outlined so that parents can see, if you're taking this set of courses, which of these will be transferable to a university. So that will be all in kind of their pamphlet.
Yep. The question was from my parent hat, by the way.
Great.
And my son's frustration with classes that weren't transferable. Other questions about cost. Most of the figures you see about MATC cost, full-time enrollment for a year is under $5,000, and we're paying $6,700 plus providing services to students. And so I wonder where that came from.
Yes, so that dollar amount is generally equivalent to our open enrollment.
Excuse me?
That dollar amount is that you see in the memo is
yeah.
generally reflective of the open enrollment fee that we would be paying for students who'd be taking courses outside of our district.
I understand that, but it's also over $2,000 more than MATC charges students for full-time enrollment, and it seems to me that we should get, if anything, a bulk discount. In fact, we're being overcharged by thousands of dollars per student.
TJ, it's a good question. I'll look into it.
Okay. I mean, it's just that, and maybe, I mean, I can understand paying a slight bonus, but that's a lot.
No, we don't plan on paying any bonuses.
Okay.
I will find out exactly how and the number was landed on.
Yeah. Recent press releases on the MATC Promise program put full-time enrollment tuition at $4,700 a year.
Yeah.
So that's where I got that figure from.
Okay.
All right, and Kate, you had something?
Yeah, no, I mean, I was just gonna add. Look, I was there at the announcement, and I'm really excited about this opportunity for our students, and wholeheartedly supportive of kind of watching this unfold and how it will unfold. I think there's not a lot of more concrete things we have right now that are so reflective of making the bridge to college, career, and community. Really, all three of those things very tangible for our students. And so I just think this is a fantastic opportunity. And overall, I think TJ, you said we have a crisis with, I forget exactly your language, but we have a crisis with excellence and equity as well, right? We have a crisis with offering students of color, girls, low-income families and students opportunities for excellence. And so for me, this is incredibly important and needed, in just the same way as it is incredibly important and needed that we're focusing on making sure that students at kind of that bottom quartile are also achieving at grade level. So, I think, look, we can't target everyone everywhere, and this is 200 students, and offering 200 students an opportunity for first-generation students, low-income students, whatever, to start pocketing away college credits is not going to hurt the students that don't necessarily have access to that opportunity, and is absolutely meeting a desperate need in our district. So.
TJ, just a last comment. We do have a plan for this joint board meeting in December, and I think that will be a great opportunity for us to get in more depth with both Madison College and the MMSD board on some of the questions you've raised about programming, about what our vision is for this opportunity. So just thank you for your support as we get going on it, and we look forward to bringing you more information later this year.
All right. Thank you. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Moved.
Laura, your advisory? All in favor?
Aye.
7 o'clock exactly. You can't.